Eli Marlowe stared at the cracked console in front of him, his breath coming hard. His mining ship, the Starbreaker, was little more than a glorified tin can. He'd taken her on countless asteroid-hopping runs back home, scavenging for rare ores. This time, though, he'd pushed too far. The ship's fuel cells were running dry, the navigation systems were shot, and he had no clue how long he'd been drifting through the strange purple-hued void that had swallowed him days ago. "Get it together, Eli," he muttered, slapping his own cheek lightly. His voice was raw from yelling at the empty cockpit. "You've dealt with worse, right? Sure. You're what? 1,000 light-years from Earth. Maybe more? Totally lost. But hey, at least you're not dead." The only response was the faint hum of the failing life support systems. He tried rerouting some power from non-essential systems to keep the air filters running a bit longer. No dice. The control panel fizzled, displaying a string of nonsense characters before shutting down completely. Great. Just great. Then came the sound. At first, he thought it was another sensor malfunction, a low, rhythmic thrum like a pulse, but it grew louder. He spun in his seat, peering out the cracked viewport. A shadow loomed outside, blotting out the dim starlight. It was massive, easily dwarfing the Starbreaker. Its surface gleamed with smooth, organic curves, like the shell of a giant mollusk. Before Eli could even react, a beam of light enveloped his ship. The Starbreaker trembled, a deep hum resonating through the hull. His stomach flipped as he felt the ship lurch forward, not of its own power, but as if it was being drawn into the belly of the alien vessel. When the shaking stopped, Eli found himself staring at an unfamiliar docking bay. The walls pulsed with faint, bioluminescent light. Strange machines, hovering platforms, spindly mechanical arms, darted about the chamber. The air smelled different, cleaner, with an odd metallic tang. And then he saw them, the aliens. They walked upright like humans, but their skin shimmered with iridescent scales that shifted color as they moved. Their faces were elongated, their eyes large and oval, glowing faintly in shades of blue and green. They wore sleek, form-fitting garments that seemed to ripple with light. Eli's breath caught in his throat. "Well," he whispered, "this is new." A group of them approached, moving in perfect synchrony. The tallest among them stepped forward. It spoke in a language that sounded like a mix of chimes and clicks. Eli stared blankly. I don't understand," he said. "English? Can you speak English?" The alien tilted its head, the scales on its neck shifting to a pale yellow hue. It made another series of sounds, then gestured with a three-fingered hand. A moment later, a smaller alien stepped forward carrying what looked like a sleek, glassy tablet. The smaller alien tapped a series of symbols on the device, and then a voice emerged from it. A voice that spoke English, albeit in a cold, mechanical tone. "Human, you are aboard the ship Xeranthe. We found your vessel in distress." Eli blinked. "You found me? I mean, yeah, I guess I was in trouble. My ship's practically dead. So, thanks for the help. Really." The tall alien nodded and responded, the tablet translating once more. "Your craft is unfamiliar. You are not of the known worlds." "That's one way to put it," Eli said, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm from a planet called Earth. Don't know if you've heard of it. Small blue, third from a yellow sun." The aliens exchanged glances, or what Eli assumed were glances. Their large, glowing eyes flickered slightly as they looked at one another. The tall one spoke again, the translator quickly converting its words. "We know not of this Earth. You are the first of your kind to appear in this sector. Your arrival is significant." Eli tried to keep his voice steady. "Significant how?" Instead of answering, the aliens turned and began walking toward a large door at the far end of the docking bay. The tall one paused and motioned for Eli to follow. "Okay. Guess I don't have much choice," Eli muttered. He climbed out of his ship's battered cockpit and followed the aliens. As they walked, he noticed how they moved with an eerie grace, their steps perfectly synchronized. The corridor they entered glowed with soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Everything about this place was strange, yet oddly beautiful. Eli tried to strike up a conversation as they walked. So, what's your name? He asked the tall alien. It stopped and turned, its eyes flashing a deeper blue. The translator responded, I am called Vren, and you are Eli Marlowe of Earth. Eli nodded. Nice to meet you, Vren. I guess this is the part where I say, take me to your leader? He gave a nervous laugh, but Vren didn't respond. Instead, Vren simply turned and continued walking. Right? Tough crowd. They reached a wide chamber filled with more aliens. Some were gathered around glowing panels. Others seemed to be discussing something, their tones rapid and musical. Eli felt like a fish out of water, but he squared his shoulders and tried not to look as nervous as he felt. Vren gestured toward the center of the room. A strange device rose from the floor, a cylindrical structure with a swirling, holographic projection above it. Eli didn't understand any of the symbols, but it looked important. He waited, unsure of what they expected him to do. Vren spoke again, and the translator echoed its words. This is the council chamber. You will explain your origins and your purpose. We must understand. Eli held up his hands. Wait a minute. I didn't come here on purpose. That wormhole or whatever it was, it pulled me in. I didn't mean to show up and cause trouble. Vren's scales darkened to a shade Eli hadn't seen before, almost a copper color. You have caused no trouble, human. But your presence is unprecedented. We must determine how you came to be here. Your answers will guide our response. Eli sighed and ran a hand through his messy brown hair. Okay, fine. I'll tell you what I know. Just don't expect it to make much sense. It's not like I have a map or anything. I'm as lost as you are. Vren's glowing eyes seemed to soften, the bright blue shifting to a softer green. We will listen. Speak. Eli Marlowe of Earth. Eli took a deep breath. Well, it all started with a routine mining run. As the Vakari escort led Eli through the labyrinthine corridors of their flagship, he felt the steady hum of alien machinery through the soles of his boots. He'd lost count of how many doors they'd passed, each one a shimmering oval that hissed open to reveal a new chamber filled with strange, glowing displays and Vakari personnel speaking in their chime-like tones. Eli's guide, the tall, copper-scaled Vren, walked with a calm grace that belied the tension of their conversation back in the docking bay. So, Eli said, breaking the silence, what's the deal with your ship? It looks like it's alive or something. Never seen anything like it. Vren glanced over his shoulder, his luminous eyes briefly flickering green before he answered. Our vessels are grown, not built. The Vakari favor organic structures. They adapt better to the changing conditions of the galaxy. Grown, Eli repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. Like you planted a seed and out popped a spaceship? In a manner of speaking, Vren replied. Our biotechnologists cultivate the hulls from genetically tailored organisms. The process ensures they remain flexible and self-repairing. That's wild, Eli said, shaking his head. My ship's a pile of scrap by comparison. We're still bolting together metal plates and praying nothing breaks. You must learn to adapt, Vren said, his tone firm yet not unkind. If your species wishes to endure among the stars, innovation will be your ally. Yeah, sure, Eli muttered. Once I figure out how to get back home, I'll start an R&D department. Their conversation was interrupted when the corridor widened into a grand atrium. High above, massive translucent panels allowed light from a nearby nebula to filter in, casting the chamber in soft shades of violet and gold. At the center of the room stood a circular table surrounded by Vakari diplomats. Among them, one stood out, smaller than the others, with scales that shimmered a striking silver. Vren gestured for Eli to follow him to the table. This is Niel, our chief liaison to the Interstellar Council. She will determine the next steps regarding your presence. Niel turned her large, glimmering eyes toward Eli. Human, she said, her voice smooth and musical. You are an unexpected arrival. The council will want to know how you came here and why. I'd love to tell you, Eli replied, but I don't have all the answers myself. One minute I was mining, the next I was sucked through some kind of wormhole. Your guess is as good as mine. Niel exchanged a glance with Vren before focusing on Eli again. Regardless of how you arrived, your presence will have implications. Your species has remained unobserved until now. That will no longer be the case. Eli rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of her words. Look, I don't want to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to figure out what happened and, if possible, find a way home. If you can help me with that, I'll be out of your scales in no time. Niel's gaze softened, her scales shifting to a pale gold. And if you cannot return? He hesitated. The thought of being stranded, of never seeing Earth again, had been lurking in the back of his mind. But hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. I don't know. Guess I'll have to figure that out if it comes to it. Niel studied him for a moment before nodding. We will begin by examining your ship. Perhaps it holds clues to the anomaly that brought you here. Vren stepped forward. With your permission, we can analyze its systems and data logs. It may lead us to a solution, or at least a better understanding of what occurred. Yeah, sure, Eli said. Not like I've got much choice. Just don't break anything important. We are more skilled than that, Vren said, his voice laced with mild amusement. Come, we will oversee the analysis together. The trio made their way back to the docking bay, where the battered remains of the Starbreaker sat like a wounded animal. Vakari technicians swarmed around it, their delicate instruments humming as they began scanning the hull. Niel leaned close to one of the monitors, her fingers moving swiftly over a glowing interface. Your vessel is primitive, she said matter-of-factly, but there are traces of unusual radiation on its exterior. This may be a key to understanding the wormhole you described. Primitive, huh? Eli said with a wry grin. That's putting it kindly. It is not an insult, Niel replied. Merely an observation. What you lack in technological sophistication, you seem to compensate for with adaptability. Well, thanks. I think. Eli watched as the technicians continued their work. So, Niel, how'd you end up being the one to talk to the council? It is my duty, she said simply. My people entrusted me with the responsibility of representing our interests. The Interstellar Council is our best hope for maintaining peace and stability among the many species that share this region. And you trust them? Eli asked. I mean, from what Vren said, it doesn't sound like everyone gets along all that well. Trust is a complicated concept, Niel said. But we must make the effort. Unity, even if imperfect, is preferable to chaos. Eli nodded, taking in her words. Sounds like you've got your hands full. Maybe I can help if you'll let me. I mean, I don't know much about this galaxy, but I'm a fast learner. And if working together gets me closer to figuring out how to get home, it's worth a shot. Niel glanced at him, her golden eyes reflecting the faint light of the bay. We shall see, human. Cooperation may yet prove to be in both our interests. Eli adjusted the unfamiliar collar of the Vakari-style garment Niel had insisted he wear. It was smooth and seamless, fitted like a second skin, and though it wasn't uncomfortable, he missed the familiarity of his old flight jacket. As he stepped into the council chamber, he couldn't help but feel out of place among the tall, graceful Vakari and the other alien delegates. The chamber itself was enormous, with a domed ceiling that displayed a shifting view of the galaxy beyond. Streams of colored light traced intricate patterns across the floor, marking different speaking zones. Alien species he'd never dreamed of seeing stood clustered around, their voices a cacophony of alien languages and tonal clicks. His head swam trying to keep track of it all. Niel walked beside him, her posture as calm and fluid as always. On his other side, Vren loomed, a silent presence that made Eli feel like he had a personal bodyguard. I have to say, Eli muttered, this is a lot fancier than any Earth meeting room I've ever seen. Even our UN doesn't look this elaborate. Niel glanced sideways at him, her eyes flickering green with what he thought might be amusement. The council chamber was designed to inspire cooperation. The Vakari contributed much of the architectural design. Eli grinned. Of course you did. Do you get royalties for that? She tilted her head, the scales along her neck shimmering gold. Royalties? Never mind. Earth joke. As they approached the central platform, Vren leaned toward Eli and murmured, "Remember to remain composed. The council members will be judging every word, every movement." Eli nodded, trying to ignore the knot tightening in his stomach. "Got it. Don't screw up. No pressure." The council's attention focused on them as Niel stepped forward to address the assembly. Her voice was steady and melodic as she spoke in the Vakari tongue, introducing Eli and summarizing the strange circumstances of his arrival. A translator device transmitted her words into a dozen different languages, each delegate hearing her speech in their native tongue. When she finished, all eyes turned to Eli. Hi," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm Eli Marlowe. I guess I'm your first human visitor. Not by choice, I should add." Niel shot him a subtle look that clearly said, "Stay on point." "I mean," Eli continued, "I didn't plan to end up here. One minute I'm mining asteroids in my sector, the next I'm sucked into some kind of wormhole. Now I'm in your part of the galaxy, and I'm as surprised about it as you are." One of the delegates, a squat, barrel-shaped alien with a glowing central eye, spoke up in a series of throaty warbles. The translator's cold, mechanical voice followed, "What is the purpose of your journey? Why were you alone in your vessel?" Eli cleared his throat. "Like I said, it wasn't planned. I was just doing my job, mining for resources in a pretty remote area. I work alone because, well, let's just say my boss isn't big on team missions." Another voice chimed in, this one belonging to a towering creature with translucent skin that shimmered faintly in the light. "How do we know you are not a spy? A scout from some hidden faction?" "I get it," Eli said, holding up his hands. "You don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either. But I'm telling the truth. I'm not here on anyone's orders. I just want to figure out what happened and maybe, if it's possible, get home." Niel stepped forward, addressing the council in a firm tone. "The Vakari have examined his vessel. It bears no markings of any known interstellar power. Its technology is far less advanced than our own. His account of a wormhole anomaly aligns with the radiation signatures we detected on his craft." The council murmured among themselves, their voices blending into a low drone. After a moment, the squat alien with the glowing eye spoke again. "Even if he is not a spy, his presence introduces uncertainty. How do we proceed?" "That's what I'm asking you," Eli said, his voice steady now. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to cooperate. I just need some help." Niel turned to him, her gaze steady. "If the council agrees, we may begin by sharing knowledge. In return, you will provide detailed accounts of your people's history and technology. Trust must be earned, human." Eli nodded. "Fair enough." A taller, more angular alien stepped forward. Its segmented limbs clicked as it moved, and its voice came out as a series of high-pitched whistles, followed by the translator's monotone. "You claim to seek only understanding. Prove it. Join our council sessions and offer your insight. If your intentions are pure, your actions will show it." Vren placed a heavy hand on Eli's shoulder. "This is a chance to gain their trust." Eli looked at Niel, who gave him a faint nod. He took a deep breath. "All right, I'm in. What's next?" Niel's lips curved into what Eli thought might be the Vakari version of a smile. "Next," she said, "we start learning from each other." Back on the Vakari flagship, Eli found himself sitting in a starkly illuminated conference room alongside Niel and Vren. The table in front of them displayed a holographic projection of a star system, its planets and moons orbiting a pulsing yellow star. Other Vakari crew members filled the room, their attention divided between their consoles and the conversation unfolding in the center. Eli drummed his fingers on the edge of his chair. "So, what exactly are we looking at here?" Niel gestured toward the swirling projection. "This is the Inari system. It is the trade hub for our sector, home to multiple species and a central location for council negotiations." Vren leaned in. "A critical point of influence." Control over Inari means significant leverage within the Interstellar Council. Great, Eli said, but I'm still not clear on what that has to do with me. Niel regarded him with a steady, golden-eyed gaze. We have received word that tensions are rising in the Inari system. There are rumors of sabotage, accusations of resource hoarding, and disputes over territory. The Council is sending mediators to prevent escalation. And you want me to go along, Eli guessed. You have demonstrated an ability to connect with diverse species, Vren said. Your status as an outsider gives you a perspective that may be valuable. The Council believes that having you present could help diffuse the situation. Eli raised an eyebrow. So I'm supposed to walk into a room full of angry aliens and what? Charm them with my winning personality. Niel's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd ever seen from her. Something like that. Your unique perspective could offer a neutral voice in the discussions. Eli let out a long breath, staring at the holographic star map. This sounds like a bad idea. I'm just a guy who used to mine rocks. I don't even know half of what's going on here. We will be there with you, Niel said. You will not face this alone. Vren nodded. It is an opportunity to prove your intentions and gain the Council's trust. Eli rubbed his temples. All right, I'll do it. But just so we're clear, if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you too. Niel's scales shimmered faintly, and she inclined her head. Noted. The Vakari ship descended into the Inari system, its sleek form gliding smoothly through the atmosphere of the central trading station. The station itself was a massive, circular structure with layers of docking ports and glowing rings of light. Smaller vessels darted around, ooting in languages he didn't understand. Exotic goods piled high on hover platforms, and a kaleidoscope of alien species moving with purpose. The sheer variety was overwhelming, each species so different, yet somehow all coexisting in this chaotic marketplace. Stick close, Niel said, glancing over her shoulder. The station can be unpredictable. No kidding, Eli muttered, dodging a particularly aggressive vendor who tried to shove a glowing crystal in his face. This place is a madhouse. Focus on our objective, Vren said. The Council's delegation is waiting in the central chamber. Eli followed them into a large circular room where a dozen representatives were already seated around a low table. The air was tense, the delegates speaking in sharp tones that cut across the translator's mechanical voice. Niel took her place at the table, Vren standing at her side. Eli lingered behind them, feeling like a fish out of water. One of the delegates, a thin alien with bright, feathery tendrils sprouting from its head, turned its gaze on Eli. This is the human you speak of? The outsider. Niel inclined her head. This is Eli Marlowe. He has proven himself a capable intermediary. Intermediary? Another delegate scoffed, its voice guttural and low. What can he possibly offer? He is not even of this galaxy. Eli stepped forward, swallowing his nerves. You're right. I'm not from here. I don't know all your customs, and I'm probably not the smartest guy in the room. But I do know what it's like to work with people who don't trust each other, who don't see eye to eye. Back home, I spent years on mining crews made up of folks from all over, people who didn't get along at first. We found ways to make it work. Maybe I can help you do the same. The room fell quiet for a moment, the delegates studying him. Niel nodded approvingly, and Vren's steady presence beside him bolstered his confidence. Very well, the feathery delegate said. Let us see what insight the human can offer. Eli sat down at the table, doing his best to follow the complex discussions that unfolded. He listened, asked questions when he could, and gradually began to piece together the sources of tension. Miscommunications, cultural differences, and disputes over resources. It wasn't long before he started noticing patterns, finding small ways to suggest compromises or clarify misunderstandings. By the end of the session, Eli was exhausted but encouraged. As the delegates filed out, Niel stepped close to him, her voice low. You handled yourself well. Barely, Eli said, leaning back in his chair. I feel like I'm making it up as I go. Sometimes that is enough, Vren said. You proved you are more than just a stranger. You have taken a step toward something greater. Eli exhaled slowly, nodding. Guess I'll take that as a win. The aftermath of the Inari discussions left Eli feeling both exhausted and oddly accomplished. He wasn't sure how much of the delicate piece would hold, but at least it hadn't fallen apart on his watch. After the final agreements were made and the council members went their separate ways, Eli, Niel, and Vren returned to the Vakari flagship to regroup. They sat together in a quiet corner of the observation deck, the viewports revealing the swirling lights of the station below. Eli leaned back in the curved chair, nursing a drink that the Vakari assured him was human-compatible. It tasted faintly sweet, with a strange metallic aftertaste that made him miss coffee. Niel sat across from him, her scales shimmering a soft golden hue. Vren stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching the stars beyond. So, Eli began, breaking the silence. Do we call that a win or just not a loss? Niel tilted her head, the light catching on the delicate ridges along her neck. The fact that no party walked away empty-handed is significant. It shows that common ground can be found, even among those who have long considered themselves rivals. Yeah, but you're the one who did most of the talking, Eli said with a wry grin. I just threw in the occasional Earth metaphor and hoped it made sense. Vren stepped forward, his tall form casting a shadow over the table. Do not downplay your contributions, human. Your perspective encouraged the others to reconsider their positions. It is a skill that will serve you well if you continue working with the council. Eli raised his cup in a mock toast. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Vren. Niel's gaze lingered on him, her eyes steady and thoughtful. I must admit, you have adapted more quickly than I expected. Is that a compliment? Eli asked, smirking. It is an observation, she replied, though the faintest hint of amusement flickered in her tone. Eli took another sip of his drink, then set it down. All right, so what's next? You keep telling me the council's going to want me involved in more stuff. What's the plan? Niel folded her hands on the table, her scales shifting to a deeper gold. For now, we continue to prepare you. There is much you do not know about our galaxy's history, its cultural complexities, and the subtle dynamics at play. If you are to be effective, you must learn quickly. Great, Eli said, leaning back and stretching his legs out. Homework, just what I signed up for. Vren's voice carried a hint of dry humor. You wanted to be involved. This is part of the process. Eli let out a long sigh. Fine, I'll hit the books or whatever you guys use, but don't expect me to become a galactic historian overnight. Niel stood, her movements fluid and deliberate. We will provide you with the resources. You have shown you can adapt. Now you must deepen your understanding. As she began to walk away, Eli called after her. Niel? She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Yes. Thanks, he said, for backing me up in there. She inclined her head slightly, a glimmer of warmth in her gaze. You're welcome, Eli Marlowe. After she left, Vren sat down across from Eli, his large frame making the chair seem almost too small. He studied Eli for a moment before speaking. You have questions. Eli snorted. I always have questions. But yeah, here's one. Why do you trust me? You don't seem like the trusting type. Vren's expression didn't change, but there was a slight shift in his tone. Trust is not given freely. You have earned a measure of it by proving yourself willing to learn, to listen, and to act with fairness. That is not something we encounter often. Eli shook his head. Man, I don't know what you guys have been dealing with, but back on Earth, I'm just a guy who did a lot of grunt work and tried to keep his head down. All this diplomacy, council meetings, it's way out of my league. You are here now, Vren said firmly, and you are not failing. Eli let out a soft chuckle. Well, thanks for the pep talk, I guess. Vren rose, his towering presence once again filling the room. Rest now, human. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, and you will need your strength. As the other man walked away, Eli leaned back in his chair, staring out at the swirling lights of the station. Maybe he didn't fully understand why these aliens were putting their faith in him, but he'd take it for now. At least it meant he had a shot at figuring out where he fit into this vast, unfamiliar galaxy. The Interstellar Council was reconvening on the Vakari homeworld. The planet's surface was an expanse of shifting hues, the result of millions of bioluminescent plants that thrived beneath the thick atmosphere. Eli had gotten used to the eerie beauty of it, even if it made him feel like he was walking through a living painting. The council had requested his presence again, and though he still felt like a fish out of water, he found himself adjusting to the alien procedures. "Eli," Vren said as they walked toward the council chamber, "you will be addressing several new delegations today. They may challenge you directly." "Great," Eli muttered, his hand brushing over the Vakari-style tunic he now wore. Because last time was such a cakewalk. Niel walked beside him, her long strides as confident as ever. "You've handled worse. This will simply require you to think on your feet." "Yeah, well, my feet aren't exactly steady," Eli replied. "You ever been on a stage in front of a dozen people who don't trust you, all waiting for you to mess up?" Niel glanced at him, her golden eyes steady. "Every session. You'll get used to it." Eli sighed, adjusting his collar as they entered the chamber. The large circular room was filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces, if the term faces even applied to some of the alien species present. The central table glowed faintly, a hovering display of star maps and recent trade routes spinning in the air. Eli took his place next to Niel and Vren, trying to look more composed than he felt. The discussions began quickly, a rapid-fire exchange of grievances, demands, and counterarguments. Eli stayed quiet at first, listening carefully. It was clear that some of the newer delegates were testing him, throwing out barbs that the translator dutifully relayed into his earpiece. He resisted the urge to snap back, knowing that any misstep would only confirm their doubts about him. "Human," one of the delegates, a sharp-featured being with glimmering, insect-like eyes, finally said, "Why should we accept your input? You have no stake in these negotiations." Eli took a breath and spoke evenly. "You're right, I don't have a direct stake. I'm not here to gain territory or resources, but that's exactly why I can help. I don't have any pre-existing bias. I just want to see you all find a way forward without tearing each other apart." Another delegate leaned forward, its long, segmented limbs clicking against the table. "And how would you suggest we proceed, outsider?" Eli glanced at Niel, who gave him the faintest nod of encouragement. He turned back to the group and began outlining a proposal, one that borrowed elements from Earth's labor disputes and trade agreements. He kept his tone steady, his suggestions straightforward. As he spoke, he noticed some of the delegates' postures shifting, their previously sharp tones softening. They weren't convinced yet, but they were listening. Niel picked up the thread when Eli paused, her own arguments dovetailing with his. Vren chimed in with pointed questions that forced the more combative delegates to reconsider their positions. Slowly, the conversation began to turn toward compromise. When the session finally adjourned, Eli slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. "That was something." "You did well," Niel said, her voice steady. "They will not admit it, but you influenced their thinking." "I'll take your word for it," Eli said, leaning back and exhaling. "So what happens now?" Vren stepped closer, his massive frame making the chair seem too small. "Now we wait. The decisions made here will set the tone for the next series of negotiations. You have proven that you can stand among them." "Yeah, until the next time they try to knock me down," Eli muttered. Niel's golden eyes fixed on him. "You are still standing, Eli Marlowe. That is what matters." He gave her a faint smile, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Guess that's something." "It is," Vren said, his voice firm. "And you will continue to stand, no matter what challenges arise." Eli wasn't sure he shared their confidence, but he appreciated the support. As the delegates filed out and the chamber emptied, he remained seated, staring at the spinning star map above the table. This galaxy was still alien to him, still filled with mysteries and challenges. But for now, he had people, Vakari and otherwise, who believed in him. That was enough to keep going. The Vakari flagship sailed steadily through the void, leaving the Inari system behind. The latest council session had ended with a fragile agreement, one that, for now, kept the peace. As the days passed, Eli spent more time with Niel and Vren, trying to make sense of his new role among these alien civilizations. The three of them had settled into a rhythm, working together to prepare for future sessions, analyzing data from the Inari dispute, and brainstorming solutions to the challenges they knew would come next. Eli found himself in the ship's communal area, a vast chamber filled with bioluminescent plants that swayed gently in an artificial breeze. He sat cross-legged on the floor, an alien datapad resting on his lap. The device hummed softly as he scrolled through Vakari historical records. Vren sat nearby, sharpening a curved blade that looked ceremonial but, according to him, was for emergencies. Niel stood at the edge of the chamber, her back turned, studying the holographic star map that floated in front of her. So, what's the deal with this old Vakari alliance thing? Eli asked, tapping the datapad. I keep reading about this golden accord. Sounds like a big deal. Niel didn't look away from the map. It was a coalition of species who pledged mutual defense and cooperation in the early days of interstellar travel. It allowed trade and technology to flourish. But as centuries passed, some factions grew more powerful, and trust eroded. The accord dissolved long ago. Sounds like most political alliances back home, Eli said, rubbing his neck. Start out strong, then end up in shambles because everyone's got their own agenda. Vren sheathed his blade and crossed his arms. The accord's collapse is a reminder. Balance is difficult to maintain. When one faction seeks too much control, others rebel. Eli glanced at him. And now the council's trying to hold that balance together again? Niel finally turned toward them. In a way, the council is not a formal alliance. It's a forum for negotiation and conflict resolution. But the fractures that led to the accord's end still linger. Old rivalries, competing interests. These things do not fade easily. Eli nodded slowly. So we're basically walking a tightrope every time we step into one of those meetings. Correct, Niel said, her voice calm. But that is why we must continue. The alternatives are far worse. Eli set the datapad down and leaned back on his hands. I'm still trying to wrap my head around why you trust me to be part of this. I mean, I'm the guy who can't even pronounce half these species' names without stumbling. Niel tilted her head, her golden eyes glimmering faintly. You underestimate yourself. Your perspective is valuable precisely because you are not part of these long-standing disputes. You see things with fresh eyes. And you're not afraid to speak, Vren added. Even when you are unsure, you ask questions, challenge assumptions. That has value. Eli chuckled. I guess it's easier to challenge assumptions when you don't know what you're talking about. Niel stepped closer, her scales catching the soft light of the chamber. You are learning. That is what matters. Every discussion, every question you ask, builds your understanding. Do not dismiss that. Eli looked up at her, appreciating the rare warmth in her tone. He knew she didn't hand out compliments lightly. Thanks, Niel. That means a lot. She nodded once, then gestured toward the datapad. Keep reading. The more you understand our history, the better you will navigate the challenges ahead. As Niel returned to her study of the star map, Vren sat down beside Eli, the floor creaking faintly under his weight. What troubles you, human? Eli sighed. Just thinking about what's next. I feel like every step forward opens up a dozen more problems. I'm never sure if I'm helping or just making it up as I go. Vren's gaze was steady. That is the nature of leadership. You will not always have clear answers, but you have allies. Together, we find a way. Eli smirked. You're pretty good at this motivational talk. You know that? Vren's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile Eli had seen from him. I speak only the truth. Eli chuckled, shaking his head. Fair enough. He picked up the datapad again, scrolling through more Vakari history. I guess I'd better keep reading, then. If we're going to keep this council from falling apart, I need all the help I can get. You have it, Vren said simply. We are here. Eli glanced over at Niel, who was still focused on the holographic map, her expression calm and thoughtful. He was beginning to understand that, while this galaxy was vast and full of challenges, he didn't have to face it alone. The Vakari flagship came out of hyperspace above a lush, forest-covered moon that orbited one of the Council's neutral planets. The moon had been chosen as the location for the final negotiations of a critical trade agreement. Eli stepped off the shuttle onto the landing platform, flanked by Niel and Vren. Around them, small groups of delegates from various species were already gathering, their different forms casting strange, rippling shadows under the planet's twin suns. Eli tugged at the Vakari-style tunic he'd reluctantly grown used to wearing. "This is it, huh? The big finale?" "It is," Niel replied, her voice steady. "The agreements made here will determine how resources are shared among the Council's member systems for decades to come." "No pressure," Eli muttered, adjusting his sleeves. "Let's just hope they don't all start yelling at each other again." "They will," Vren said matter-of-factly. "But we will manage it." As they entered the meeting hall, a domed structure built into the side of a cliff, Eli noted how much quieter this place felt compared to the council chambers he'd grown accustomed to. The air inside was cool and carried the faint scent of the forest outside. The delegates were already seated around a wide, circular table made of a single polished slab of the moon's native stone. Holographic displays hovered above the table, showing graphs, star charts, and supply projections. The tension in the room was palpable. Niel and Vren took their seats, and Eli settled into a chair beside them. His role here was unofficial, but the council had made it clear they wanted him present. Some still regarded him with suspicion, others with curiosity, but over the past weeks, he'd earned enough respect, or at least tolerance, to be included in discussions like this one. The discussions started off tense, with sharp words exchanged between factions. Two neighboring systems argued over mining rights in a mineral-rich asteroid field. Another group of delegates accused their trading partners of price manipulation. The holograms shifted rapidly as data was presented, refuted, and represented in slightly different forms. Eli watched the interplay, waiting for the right moment to speak. When a particularly heated exchange began to spiral out of control, he leaned forward and cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt," he said, "but it seems like we're all talking in circles. Can we take a step back and figure out what each side really wants here?" The room went quiet. All eyes, or their alien equivalents, turned toward him. Eli held their gaze, trying not to fidget. He could feel Niel's calm presence beside him, and Vren's steady, grounding energy on the other side. It gave him the confidence to keep going. "Look, I get it," he said. "You've all got your own interests to protect. Nobody wants to give up what they feel they've earned. But this back and forth isn't getting us anywhere. Maybe if we break this down into smaller steps, we can find some common ground. For example, instead of arguing over who owns the whole asteroid field, why not split it into zones and assign a neutral party to overs? Have seen in previous arrangements." Another delegate, one of the more combative ones, grumbled but ultimately nodded. "If it is truly neutral, I would accept this approach." Eli glanced at Niel, who gave him the faintest nod. Encouraged, he continued, "Great. Now that we have a starting point, let's move on to the pricing issues. Can we agree on a baseline rate, one that adjusts according to market conditions but remains stable enough for both sides to plan ahead?" The discussion resumed, but this time, the tone was less hostile. Eli's suggestion became a framework that the delegates built upon, modifying details and adding clauses. As the hours passed, they inched closer to an agreement. When the final terms were at last recorded and the delegates began to rise from their seats, Eli let out a long breath. He turned to Niel, his expression one of cautious relief. "Did that really just happen?" "You played your part well," she said, her golden eyes steady. "I still feel like I'm winging it half the time," Eli admitted. "Most do," Vren said, standing and stretching his shoulders. "What matters is the result. And today we achieved one." As the delegates left the chamber, Niel walked with Eli and Vren back toward the landing platform. The forest air felt cool and refreshing after the tense negotiations. For a few moments, none of them spoke. Finally, Eli broke the silence. "So, what's next? We've got one agreement. How many more are out there waiting to fall apart?" "Many," Niel said simply. "But one success often leads to another. We will continue as we have." Eli shook his head and chuckled softly. "You two really know how to keep a guy busy." "It is better than the alternative," Vren replied. "You would be bored otherwise." Niel glanced at Eli, her expression lightening ever so slightly. "And you do not seem the type to sit idle." Eli grinned. "You're not wrong. Just don't expect me to keep pulling miracles out of thin air." "Only small ones," she said, her tone almost teasing. As they reached the shuttle and boarded, Eli settled into his seat and looked out at the moon's forested landscape. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he'd come to understand that he wasn't walking it alone.